Hello, and thank you for joining us for our April Coffee Chat on the topic of collaborative record keeping. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mari Rystan, and I'm the Marketing Director and Product Manager of IrisBG. Øyvind Rystan, who's the founder and CEO of IrisBG, is also here today. Today, we will get an example on how it's possible to work collaborative on your records. We will hear from Angelica Sauceda. She's the plant record specialist at UC Davis, and she will give us a proper walkthrough of the workflow she has created when working with staff, students, and volunteers at UC Davis. She has generously suggested to share her resource folder with you, so hopefully there will be some tools in it for you to utilize, even with a very different setup for your record keeping. Before I give the word to Angelica, just a few words on the coffee chats. The idea with these sessions is that we at IrisBG would like to offer you a space where you can connect with peers and have a chat about IrisBG and issues that may arise through the work with your collection. We don't have a fixed format on these sessions, so please get in touch with me if you would like to present a challenge or talk on a topic. It can be big or small. And hopefully you will make some new connections here today, and together we might become a bit wiser. This map is an overview of all the institutions that you here today represent. And to further learn a bit more about who's here today, we have our little poll. The first question is, as usual, related to your experience with IrisBG, and the two other questions are related to Angelica's presentation. It's going to make you happy, Angelica, to see that most people are interested in all of the topics you're going to talk to today. And yeah, all right, with no further ado, I'll give the word to Angelica Sauceda.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time today. I am Angelica Sauceda, Plant Record Specialist at the UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden. And today's talk, as you know, is about supporting multiple users in managing their plant records projects with IrisBG. And here I am with my coworker planting the first plant ever that I have planted in the collection. And I've been here 6 years. So I think it's cause for celebration. It's kind of maybe not surprising that a plant records person hasn't planted anything, though I am an avid gardener. So I will be sharing coffee chat resources after the talk. There'll be templates of some of the stuff that I work with, some training, some activities for students. And I just like it to be a start of a conversation around how you perhaps manage staff, student, and volunteers in your work. So in 2018, I formalized what is now called the Plant Records and Mapping Learning by Leading team. Those two students at the top right were my founding students, who then trained other students, who then trained other students. And pretty soon, we found ourselves not just inventorying parts of the collection that, have been around, just to say things are still here and things aren't there. We found ourselves also supporting the many other student teams that our organization manages, such as the Urban Tree Stewardship, Waterway Stewardship, Sustainable Horticulture student team, and Habitat Horticulture student team, which each all run amok in the 100 acres that is our public garden. And they happen to be the ones closest to a lot of the work. Working with students is a lot of fun because they allow you to experiment, they come up with new ideas, and they just have a lot of energy. So I came to IrisBG with a question. I manage a lot of these projects in tasks, which nobody voted for. I love tasks. So we're going to talk about tasks a lot today. So in this example, we have two staff leaders who co-share management of at least 3 paid students and then many more unpaid students to plant trees that they have propagated to trial as new urban forest trees. And so here you can see they have a task list of all the items that they have created in the database. And you have within the task the status of each of those items. And the students come here to continue chipping away at updating coordinates, and they'll flag when something is done using that status toggle within the task. However, our staff lead was confused because, you know, they didn't have items in here that they know a student said they made, which created a question for me. When we ask students to enter data, we're really giving them a lot of responsibility to do it correctly and check their own work. And so we know that there's a combination of fields that we can query to bring these records into tasks. So examples of that would be the planting date, the location code, and the status person, which I ask the students always to write the lead horticulturalist for that project. And as an extra safeguard, I ask them to write a special code in the comments of that item. That way I have at least 4 variables to query and bring in to their project tasks. But we have this missing data. And so I looked at the record and thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I could look up all the items a person who registered into the database, you know, what it looks like on a map? So I went to items map and looked for item registration initials, and I didn't find it, but I made a workaround, which was to query the database using reports, item reports, where you could find that field, export the records, copy the accession number, full number, bring it back into a task, and then map it. But IrisBG, in their latest update, they allowed me to now create a task where I could query item registration initials. So this being the student that I'm interested in seeing their work. So that's kind of cool. This like new key is like allowing me to have more personalized kind of tasks or auditing reports, like ongoing inventory of what one person is entering in the database. And you could set that for like a time range, right? Like I want to see what this person entered in the database during spring. And what's cool about it all being organized in tasks is that you're able to run a map report based on that task, which is what you see here. So ultimately, this is what I wanted to see so that the student and the lead staff person could take a look at that student's work and decide whether or not they were done, that they've completed the task. So I'm pretty happy with that. And that concludes part 1, which is the kind of problem solution that we have with the latest update.
Please.
All right. Well, let's go on to part 2. So this is like the whole enchilada, right? I wanted to talk about accession objects, accession items, tasks, reports, and data import tools. And I also somehow wanted to tell you about volunteers working with the horticulturalists, the staff, and our students who are also staff. So these are the key topics we're going to cover, I hope to cover. I do have some slides hidden that kind of go into details about maybe what my volunteers are doing. And then, you know, we could revisit those details maybe in the Q&A because you might have some questions. So here I am, a plant records specialist with IrisBG, and I'm constantly trying to figure out which way to go. The coolest thing about IrisBG is that it's so customized, and that means all of us have different workflows and different solutions to different questions we're asking. So today I'm just showing you my journey in IrisBG and how my collaboration with many people have kind of brought us to this point. When I started working with IrisBG, I felt a lot like this funnel where all this confetti information was falling and I had to bring it into this database and somehow create all these outputs. And I thought the only way this is really going to work is if I make more funnels. So I trained students and then I trained staff and I trained the staff students. So now there's a bunch of people working in the database, coming up with new systems. It is very experimental and I'm constantly kind of reinventing how we're doing things. But this is just a snapshot of what we're doing now. So I want to shed a little light on where all of our records start, which is an accession object or an accession record. We all have these. They have details. We all use different details. Every record uses different details. When we started, our volunteers were referencing records that our staff were giving us to populate the database. And there was just a lot that they were getting caught up in, like creating a new taxon name and getting lost in the database. But this is our records, right? And we have our custom attributes on the right, where we have the intended location string, which is a string of codes indicating which collection this accession record is probably going to go into. Well, we thought there has to be an easier way to do this. We have this wonderful thing called the cloud, and we have Excel data sheets in the cloud. And so we basically created a mirror image of the accession details in this spreadsheet so that staff can go through and populate their records. And what this is really time saving for everybody, because we're no longer entering the same data over and over directly in Iris. We're plopping a few of the unique values in and then copying the redundant values for each record. All right, so here's the thing that's unique about our data sheet. This is the example data you're going to get to. So we have this thing called received as name. As you know, so many plants come to us with incorrect names, missing information like patent information, misspellings. And IrisBG won't take that if that name isn't already in the database. And so my workaround for that was to go ahead and assign all accession objects a name and review taxon record. That way I could just push all the data in. And we'll talk about what happens later. I also need coded language for where we got this item. So you'll notice that there's a lot of fields that, well, except that one, are color coded. And if you were to go to the definitions sheet and find that code, just next to it, you'll be, vice versa. Like if you knew it was Walter Gardens, you would write Walters and then find it and then look at the code adjacent to it and then just copy and paste it in the field it belongs in, et cetera, et cetera. So that exists for a lot of the fields that one would need to populate this sheet. And then the last thing about this sheet is you could see that there's blue filled records and then these kind of not blue records. That indicates that that data is already in IrisBG. There's also a bunch of comments that explain how to use the sheet, like what each field means. So, ta-da, we basically QC it, right? Make sure everything's good and then import it into IrisBG. In the case where I don't have a contact code, they'll just write it in the comments. I'll go to IrisBG, enter the new contact code, update the definition sheet, import the data. It doesn't happen that often, but that's the secret key there. Once the data is imported into IrisBG, I need to group it for certain tasks. These are my 3 lovely volunteers. They come once a week for 3 hours. We meet on Zoom. We have done that since the pandemic started, but they've been volunteers for the Arboretum since before my time there. So they're extremely dedicated, really hard workers. And I've broken up the workflow for them into 2 tasks. I go into tasks, I open my name and review task for that year, and I bring in all records belonging to that year so that they could begin the name and review task, which is opening each record and changing it from name and review to whatever taxon it needs to be. And the second task, because I want to divide that workflow, is to now open a new task, query the database for new records that are destined to go to the fair. And then in that task, they're going to update all fields relevant for our plant sale. So this is what the name and review task looks like. And volunteers, they're going to come here and they're going to scroll right on down to where the name and review records start, because those are newly important. They're going to open this window, go to the accession details, open the taxon window, look for the taxon name they need for that record, attach it, save, update the task, move on. And the volunteers, they like negotiate where they're starting. I'm starting at the top of this range. I'm starting at the bottom. I'm starting in the center. And then they just get to work. And when that task is done, they'll now move to this is all the steps I was telling you. You don't need to see unless you really want to. Then they move to the fair description task. So this one's different in that you don't see the work they need to do yet, right? Because there's no longer that face value of name and review as like the object we need to update, because the fair description updates happen beneath this level in the taxon table where the description fields are. So the volunteers actually need to flag these from open to completed so that they're not redundantly doing this work. However, there is a caveat with multiple users using tasks and making updates at the task level, because there could only be one saver. So if we all open up this task at the same time and I add records to it and you add your own set of records to it and I save, that's good for me. But once you save, I think those records are gone. Like if I change something from open to completed and you change another record from open to completed, you override those. So I always ask my volunteers, like, when you get to this task, we need a saver. Somebody says I'm the saver, and then they collect at the end of the workday the updates that were made, the range of updates that happened, and then they toggle it from open to completed. And all that work goes to supporting our plant sales. So we export a lot of the data for managing our inventory and creating this database for people to view what it is we have available for that plant sale. So it's nice to celebrate some of the deep work that we do in IrisBG for these like bigger products. All right, are we ready to talk about working with horticulturalists? If you're like me, you're probably scratching your head. How do I get horticulturalists to work in IrisBG? Well, schedule them, schedule them, schedule them, schedule them. Make your student schedule with them, annoy them. You cannot let them forget about you and the work they need to do in IrisBG. So this is the outline of the system my students have helped create and help support horticulturalists through, and other students. I just want you to like take a screen capture or whatever, so you could kind of have some kind of compass as we go through all the steps. So first we're going to create a task. It's an accession task for a planting list for a project they're going to put in the ground on a given date. It could also be a larger project like the Texas tree trials that I started with. They're going to report on it and export fields that are useful, right? We don't want everything from the accession object record. We're going to copy things that matter for use in creating an accession item data import sheet. The horticulturalists should be able to create that list of I planted this many things here on this day. And they just put it in the spreadsheet, and that allows it to come into the database with data import. We're then going to harvest those records in a new task called a planting record task, because now these are items that represent a planting event. And if they want those coordinates updated precisely, they're going to use that task to flag whether something's done or not. And then, like you saw, we could make a map and see that project. So in this example, you can see that I've scheduled with my horticulturalist so we could make this planting list of plants that they want to put in the South African collection in the fall. So when I open this little field here, it'll jump to the accession data table, and I'll go to the advanced search and define that criteria. I'm looking for accessions that are from 2021 to 2022, whose intended location is South Africa. And I'll write that in the description. Sometimes I'll even write the date so that if I know more stuff came in, I know I need to update this task. I'll go to IrisBG reports where I have a custom planting list report. I will select the task we just created and export that data. So you can see here that there's data that is useful, right? Like the number, the accepted name, the day we got it, who brought it in, is it wild or not? How many do we get? What size is it? And this is useful for students as well. They'll then copy relevant fields into the data import sheet. So literally grab this range, plop it here. They might grab the number of specimens, plop it here. And they also will need to grab a coordinate. So just like my accession data import sheet, I have other sheets within that file that give codes. So if you go to location code sheet, I've printed from IrisBG my location codes and kind of massaged the data table to look like this so that they can go, oh, I need to get the coordinate for South African section. These are the coordinates. And they can just paste those down into the data import sheet. And all those points are going to land on the same place, right? And some collections are like that. Like maybe we have a small bed that we put all the points in the center and we move on and that's done. But in other cases, the staff might want to put the things exactly where they think they are. So in that case, I'll put a coordinate that's obviously not in the bed so that they could audit their work and be like, oh, this point in the pathway, I need to update its coordinate. It's not supposed to be here. So anyway, our data import sheet is ready. The horticulturalist is happy with it. They've made things that need to be individually mapped, one record to itself. Instead of saying 3 are here, they wanted 3 unique ones so they can map them wherever it was they planted. They give that to me and I import it. We make another appointment to bring these data points into a new planting record task where we query the database for things that person planted on a certain day in a certain place and drop it in, and they will open the record. So they're looking at item number 1. They'll go to that item, update the coordinate, and mark it as completed, and then move on to the next item. So here we got a horticulturalist in the wild working on IrisBG. I kid you not, I brought a coffee table for this to happen. Try to just get them engaged. So now you want to see the data. Well, if I go to IrisBG maps and just say, show me everything in the South African collection, this is what I get. It doesn't really show the work that the horticulturalist did. But as you already know, we have it in a task. So we can map it according to that task. So make an appointment with them when they say they're done updating that task to look at the data and say, is this really done? And if it's done, we'll update that task status to completed. So in a nutshell, that's what happens. This is really useful for larger projects. A lot of horticulturalists that plant 1 or 2, 3 things a day will just go in and enter the data. But if a student is working on this, this is a nice way for the horticulturalist to collaborate with the student or our team to get this work done. And I'll talk about that next. So, like I said, students are a lot of the times closest to the work. They apprentice with a lot of the staff. So on the bottom right, you could see students about to plant a big project. Really, I give them that export planting list, and they are then going to map for me on a field paper map, because the projects might be so big that multiple people need a map and I need to have multiple data import sheets to get it done. And one of the examples I have in the coffee chat folder is a big renovation project that covered 4 collection areas and had over 400 accession items that I want to say 8 students divided up the work and updated the coordinates using that framework I just shared. Okay, so in this example, 4 collection areas, 4 different student apprentices responsible for doing these types of field maps. So this is just the CAD file that the contractor gave us, and the students went through and followed our annotation protocol, which is to write the abbreviated accession number, abbreviated taxon name, and then the number of items for that given planting. So this one says 20, this one says 3. I know it's blurry, this one says 1, but the students then use this to populate their data import sheet. And they divide it into manageable chunks. So this might be LaRue Bridge, upper slope near bridge, or maybe that's this, that makes more sense. And they make sure that that's really clear to me that that's what they want this to be called. That way, this then could become its own task for updating. So a lot of the students, they develop spatial awareness, they run transects, and they map this kind of stuff out. They go over plant ID together, referencing the planting list provided by the horticulturalists. And we'll have, here's that task that I was telling you about. The task will have the field map, and the student will hone in on a record they want to update, open that item record, go to the item details, and move it from its center point, which was probably on this piece of pavement, to where they think it should go. Save their changes and mark that complete. So that concludes my talk.